we once talked about The Rocketeer. And that was very much, you'd mentioned that was very, like, formative. It's something that you just really, like, clung to. I never saw The Rocketeer when I was younger, but what I did see was my Rocketeer.
This is your Rocketeer?
Today's film, The Phantom.
I can see the kind of almost the same kind of fabric.
Yeah, so it seems like a lot of people grow up with kind of like one of those characters, and most people it's probably Indiana Jones, but I didn't see Indiana Jones until I was like a teenager. The Phantom was on Sci-Fi, it was on HBO all the time, and I saw it a lot. And we're here to talk about it today. Can Billy Zane be a superhero? He already is. Welcome back to the show, everybody. I'm one of your hosts, Kyle Goethe from GoatFilmReviews.com.
I'm Nick for the St. Paul Filmcast. Thanks for finding us. Thanks for watching. And for our loyal fans, thank you for continuing to support the show. Hey, we do have a Patreon. Check that out for some great content and great deals and opportunities to tell us what movies we can review in the future with, of course, a shout-out as well. Go ahead and hit the like and subscribe button. Tell your friends about the show. It's a little thing you can do for us. It's a big help for our show and to get out there a little bit more. Kyle and I are members of the Minnesota Film Critics Alliance. Check out that webpage for critics' reviews as well as ours. And today we're I think you can call it a cult classic from the late 90s.
I think so.
Yeah.
It's Phantom time. All right. 400 years ago, a young boy witnessed his father's death. He was washed ashore on an island, and the mythical hero, the Phantom, was born. Present day, which is really the 30s, when Xander Drax goes on the search for the skulls of Taganda, it's up to the Phantom to stop him from taking over the world.
Okay, this is directed by Simon Wincer. He also did Harley Davidson, The Marlboro Man, with his Don from Miami Vice.
Why am I blank? Oh, my God. Don Johnson. There it is.
Johnson.
Of course.
And then Mickey Rourke is in that movie. It's kind of a below-the-radar action movie that kind of built up steam with the video rental culture. Didn't get a lot of in the theaters, but the video rental picked up.
Yeah.
He also directed Free Willy, Operation Dumbo Drop.
He certainly hit a stride with like these kind of family-esque adventure films. Between Free Willy and Dumbo Drop, and I think this in the middle, too.
And this in the middle as well. And then he did a couple episodes of the Adventures of Young Indiana Jones.
Yeah.
This is based on Lee Falk's comic book strip Superhero of 1936. Yeah, he predates Superman, even though Superman's considered the first comic book superhero. Superheroes were pretty much in comic strips before comic books. So like Dick Tracy and the Phantom, they're not really comic book heroes. They were actually comic strips.
Yeah, it was believed that these over-the-top characters could only last for a few panels.
Right.
And as we've seen, no characters have ever been popular in graphic novels. So,
so if you want to understand why is Superman, who came out in 1939, considered the first comic book superhero, because he exclusively was a comic book. This script was written by Jeffrey Boehm. Of course, everybody knows Jeffrey Boehm because we just did an episode of Inner Space.
Yeah, and again, like going back to that Indiana Jones, wrote the third Indiana Jones film, The Last Crusade, my favorite one. Jeffrey Boehm also wrote some of my favorite action films in Lethal Weapon 2 and 3. So definitely, I like Jeffrey Boehm.
And if you haven't got to it, he also wrote the script for Witches of Eastwick, which is kind of Jack Nicholson's. It's hard to say his best because every time you see his movie, it's his best.
Yeah, he's got like 10 best films of all time. So,
but when the three ladies get together and form a witches cult to get after them, it's the best. So, Witches of Eastwick is another one of those below the radars great 80s movies that are just interesting to watch because you see Cher just spit out all this venom to Jack Nicholson. It's all true too. Of course, stars Billy Zane. This is before Titanic, and this is after Dead Calm.
Yep.
Dead Calm was kind of filmed in Australia. It was kind of like Australian actors because you have Nicole Kidman, that's her first movie, and Billy Zane's kind of one of his first films, and then you have Sam Neill, and it's all pretty much them three.
Yeah, and I find it interesting that Zane was hired for The Phantom, seeing that it was a heroic role when he would be following it up from Dead Calm. It would be right before Titanic, and it would be right around the time of Demon Knight. So it was like Billy Zane had all these villainous roles. And it's just peculiar because nowadays it almost seems like when you're a heroic actor, you have to play heroes all the time. Yeah. And when you're a villainous actor, you play the villain all the time. And I wish we could go back to a time period when you could play whoever the hell you wanted.
Right, yeah. You could just play somebody you just want to punch in Titanic.
Yeah.
All right. And then it stars the very fresh, young-faced Catherine Zeta-Jones.
Yeah, I actually forgot she was in this movie. I'm not gonna lie to you.
I think she probably forgot she was in this movie. Right?
I remember watching it as a kid, but like that was my first introduction to Catherine Zeta-Jones. Formative years for me. And then when I would see her later on, I would forget that I'd seen her multiple times before, and it was just this case of, yeah, she's there, not a big role.
Yeah, until she was in the Zorro film.
Yeah, just a couple years later.
A couple years later, and then she really popped.
Oh, and she was also in a miniseries version of Titanic. That came out a year or two before the Titanic movie. So there you go.
There's a Titanic series before the film.
Yeah, it was like a 2-episode miniseries event. It was pretty low budget, but yeah, it's nice enough.
Okay. Rounding out the cast, you have James Remar. Now, all of us will know that's Dexter's adoptive dad who comes back, being his angel on his shoulder, to how to keep you below the radar. But that's kind of very more famous for me for is being Dexter's adoptive dad.
I always remember. I have like the worst placement for James Remar because I always think of Mortal Kombat 2. Just a truly terrible movie, but he played Raiden in that film, and that was my first experience with James Remar. Was he took over the role of Raiden, and
wasn't what's his name?
It was Christopher Lambert first.
Yeah, well, Highlander was,
but he wasn't coming back for that sequel. For those of you that have been watching movies recently, though, James Remar just did I guess you'd call it a cameo in Christopher Nolan's new film Oppenheimer. He has one of the best scenes in that entire film. So
yeah,
Remar is still rocking and rolling there.
Yeah, and then he's gonna have to say the name because he's from Mortal Kombat as well.
Yeah, he's from the first. He's from the good one. Cary Hiroyuki Tagawa, who plays the great Kabai Seng. And it's Seng, S-E-N.
Thanks for saying that for me, yeah.
Because they didn't want to associate him with people actually named Singh, S-I-N, which is what the original character would have been. So it's Seng. Cary Hiroyuki Tagawa, again, one of those guys, plays great villains all the time.
Right.
He doesn't have to say anything. Or two.
No, you don't have to say. There's a stand, higher ground than everybody else, and just like kill him.
Although I will say, if he told me your soul is mine, I would give him my soul. So,
all right. This is an interesting side note that kind of investigating this movie is kind of interesting to find out. The cinematographer is David Burr. He would do cinematography of George of the Jungle 2. I'm sure you saw that one.
No, I did not.
Crocodile Dundee in L.A., The Cup. But interesting, he's also been second unit director for Thor Ragnarok, Aquaman, and Mad Max Fury Road. So even though he's cinematographer for those films, it's interesting to know that he's also been second unit for those action movies.
Yeah.
Which is interesting. If you didn't know what a second unit was, he pretty much do all the action bits where there's not a lead star in the scene.
Yeah. When the main cast goes to lunch, that's when you get to work. Like you take care of all the little parts where you'll see like a hand in a scene or
if there's like two stuntmen in this, they're trying to be and they're not going to be the actors. They're doing what the actor is supposed to be doing. Falling off the bridge, and this second unit come in to film it. Yeah.
Yeah. Oftentimes, your favorite action set pieces are not done by the head cinematographer.
Yeah.
They will, certainly be a part of that conversation, but they're not there during it. So
the greatest second unit action I would have to say is in The Dark Knight when the car is supposed to be when Harvey Dent shoots Eric Roberts, but the scene when the car goes and flips over. That's a totally second unit shot.
Yeah.
And they filmed it and then sent it to Nolan. Because it doesn't fit anything else. It just shows the car going over and flips upside down and there's a train going. So you had a lot of different elements of action to keep it busy. But you could tell it just inserted in the movie. There we go. Right.
We forgot to kill him.
Yeah. And then you go then you think is Harvey Dent upside down now? Yeah. Yeah. So that's second unit direction. This is produced by, interesting to find out, Village Roadshow Pictures. Hearst Entertainment, which is founded by William Randolph Hearst and his trust. So it's Hearst Entertainment, and then the Ladd Company, Alan Ladd Jr.'s Ladd Company.
Yeah, a lot of and that's I think why the film has certainly kind of not had a lot of home video releases is because it's certainly curious about who owns elements of the film, or is it all owned by the Falk estate by now? It's very nebulous where those things were, because this film, no joke, had been trying to get off the rails and start getting filmed back in like the 60s. Sergio Leone wrote a screenplay for this film.
Yeah, there's an interview where he said he was working on making this.
Yeah, he was going to follow up with another Falk character that I wasn't as aware of, but he was going to do 2 Falk character adaptations, which is very just interesting when you consider Sergio Leone what he was most famous for.
Yeah.
And then during the 1970s, Adam West almost appeared as the character in a film version. Yeah. In the 80s, it was almost Dolph Lundgren. So we almost had that instead of the Punisher. And then for a time, even Joe Dante was attached to direct.
So late
A lot of
80s,
people
early
failed with
90s,
it.
right?
Yeah.
Late 80s, early 90s, Joe Dante was going to do kind of a cheeky, campy, tongue-in-cheek, and he worked with Jeffrey Bohm.
Yeah, Jeffrey Bohm and him did Interspace, and actually they were the ones who started work on the satirical spoof version of this initially. So it's amazing that Jeffrey Bohm kind of hung in there and then kind of just tightened it up and made it more of an homage to that time instead of a straight spoof.
So yeah, so you can understand if it's after Interspace at 87 that Joe Dante and him were kind of mixed writing a script, and then that script kind of bits of it keeps maintain it, and then they try to make it more brooding, because what happened was 89 Batman. Everybody now wanted a dark brooding superhero.
Yep.
You know, no more the flashy Superman of the 70s, and no more campy and, you know, fanfare. They wanted a dark, bruising, punishing, nihilistic almost superhero.
Well, I think they wanted everything around the superhero to be that way, and then it's almost like the superhero had that kind of Rocketeerness or the Indiana Jones, where they were like they were the heroic person in the darkness. They were the light against the black, and kind of rising up in that way. And I think that's why we got that. We got like what the Shadow was around that time, Dick Tracy. We always had these
the Crow.
Yeah, the Crow as well, which had actually.
So
yeah, same kind of appearance. So.
Now, talk a little bit more in my review. Is so you have a lot of it of the Joe Dante kind of super campy, very fun, not taking it serious, like Gremlins. Gremlins is a horror movie, but also I wouldn't mind if you put it in the comedy section also.
Yeah, definitely the second one.
Yeah, and so there's some horror things into it, but also there's a lot where you laugh out loud to it.
Yeah,
and I think that'll be interesting to put that in the superhero, where he's kind of supposed to be. Every move that he makes is but then he's clunky coming out the window and falls over. You're like, all right, I'm here to rescue you. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's certainly that element of you can see the Joe Dante-ness in the film. I believe he did operate in kind of a producerial kind of mentorship role for the film. Right. So it still survives in some form, but I think the Phantom is one of those characters that's just really hard to peg down. Because how do you make it work? I think even up until
you mean a white guy that's a superhero in African jungle?
white savior roles really. I think there's a way to do this character justice without making it and literally this is a case where I do think race swapping this character to someone who would be more indigenous to that area would actually help the film immensely. But yeah, in 2008 they tried to do a legacy sequel. In 2014 they tried to do a reboot with Sam Worthington. And there was even a miniseries in 2009 that I never watched because it looked awful. So I think they've been trying to get this character down for decades, and I think this is the closest we've come to it.
Right. And we talk about especially superheroes in the 90s, because it went high spectrum of fanfare like Rocketeer and then dark brooding like The Crow.
Yeah.
And somewhere in between is The Phantom. So, yeah, up next is our review of The Phantom. This came out in 96. This is kind of before, I think right around the time Batman and Robin, right?
Post Forever. We were still pre-Batman and Robin, so Batman had not ruined his life yet.
Yeah. And this is after The Crow. This is after Darkman. And this is after Rocketeer. And this is after Batman. And it makes sense that this is kind of a mixture of a dark superhero and a light superhero.
Yeah.
This is kind of the in-between.
Yeah. It's interesting that the only famous DC or Marvel property during this time period was Batman. And it just seemed like, because Marvel, it's almost like they came out the door with Howard the Duck, and then no one wanted to touch a Marvel movie again. And we wouldn't get one until Blade, I guess, a few years later.
This is a year before Blade.
Yeah, so this was kind of the last bastion of trying to do a comic book kind of character
of the 30s
without trying to just get one of the more notable ones.
Yeah.
And again, even the notable ones would fail in the following year with Batman and Robin. So it was like we were in this real kind of mixture time of how do we make this work. I think this movie is a lot of fun. It's definitely flawed. And I think every time I watch it, I see those flaws. They become more apparent. But I still have a lot of fun watching the film. It's a very entertaining, high spectacle kind of thing for a low budget.
I critique this almost like I critique Darkman. I don't get enough Darkman in the movie Darkman. I don't think you get enough Phantom in this movie. But understand, you have to have the right mixture. You have to have the good, for a superhero movie, you have the right villain. And you have to have a very conniving villain. I understand Treat Williams is doing his best to make him really awful, but he almost seems like he's a 12-year-old boy. An adult.
Yeah, I don't mind that he's got that kind of... I think he accomplishes what Jesse Eisenberg was trying to do with Batman v Superman, in that he has this childlike wonder, and you're going to give the child a knife, and he's going to do horrible things with it. What my biggest problem with Tree Williams' character is yeah, like the writing doesn't serve him as well as the film goes on, because we kind of get to this point where he's looking for these skulls of Taganda, and those are printed in my mind. Those are lovely pieces of props. But when he gets them, he combines them and they shoot magic light, and it's like, I wish they did something else that was more spectacular, because the actual props themselves are awesome. If I could buy those skulls and put them on my mantle, I would. Yeah. They're amazing props, and they just don't do anything when they eventually get their chance, except for kill James Remar.
And then you have, which is kind of, well, I'll use the word, you have Catherine Zeta-Jones, who's completely digmatized by the Phantom, that she's completely blinded by everything else.
Yeah.
As soon as she's seen him. And then you have Christy Swanson, who's like, I want to go for the blonde, but the dark brunette is so bad and evil. Right. Yeah.
Yeah, and since we're talking Christy Swanson after she was cut out of To Live and Die in L.A., a film we recently talked about, she appeared in 2 scenes that were cut from that film. So we finally get some Christy Swanson on the show. But yeah, she doesn't do a lot.
Why? Yes.
You know?
Why are you so infatuated with this person? Where obviously Catherine Zeta-Jones' character has far more talents and skill, even though she's evil.
Yeah, I think the thing with Christy Swanson's character Diana and the Phantom being Kit Walker is the fact that there is intrinsically something linking them. It's just not developed all that well. The character interactions, this is another film where I think, like, not so much more runtime is necessary, but just more stuff happening in each scene. Like, make each scene valuable. Whereas there are a couple of scenes throughout the film where I don't feel like there's value added going on.
No.
And that's kind of the film's intrinsic problem, is it's 100 minutes long, and I feel like there's probably about 80 minutes worth of film.
No, and you get this great intro scene, which is very much like the Sorcerer, the truck going through the gated bridge. Yep. But it's also a little bit of reference of Indiana Jones. I see a lot of reference of Indiana Jones. It's very much, if I ever saw the Rocketeer show up, I was like, yeah, this universe is totally connected.
Well, I feel like James Remar is intentionally made to look like Indiana Jones. He's got the kind of the hat, the brim, and just kind of the outfit of him. And I think the idea is to kind of play that off, like introduce him as the character. We first meet him in the film. We're wondering, is he our lead? Is he our likable person?
Yeah, it's
and then
very much like
the
Raiders
to drive across the bridge.
Yeah, it's very much like Raiders and Temple of Doom, kind of a hybrid in the beginning.
Yeah, because even he has his own like indigenous child that he's kidnapped, who is going to be his sidekick.
Yeah, there's a lot of cultural. In this movie.
Yeah, I think that's why the film could be revisited and have, or I think the character could be revisited and kind of updated for today's times and have a lot more fun with it. This is what we have from the time period. This was popular at the time, of course, but I think Billy Zane, I think he does a really great job of being that kind of heroic character, flawless character in some ways, because we see him through that lens.
It's interesting to see that it's kind of a reverse of Batman. Batman's far more Bruce Wayne's far more comfortable being Batman and clunky being Bruce Wayne. Mm-hmm. And this is kind of the opposite. He's kind of clunky being the Phantom, but he really knows how to be Billy Zane. Yeah, Kit Walker. Yeah.
The biggest problem with that, too, is there was no real conversation between Wincer as a director and, like, creative and Zane during the prep work for this, because they all just assumed Billy Zane wasn't going to bulk up, and so they built a suit that was kind of like the Batman one, where it had those fake muscles built in, and then Billy Zane shows up on the first day of filming, and he's jacked. And it's like...
Maybe
this conversation should be had, because I do think that the costume for the Phantom ended up being just kind of a purple bodysuit, and I think I would have liked to have seen what the actual costume they had prepped originally for it was, because I think it probably looked better than this. But the thing is, I would also rather have Billy Zane get in shape for the role. So if the conversations had happened, the film I think would have looked a little bit better. Because as it stands, they did use their budget pretty well. The original idea was to film the movie in Hawaii. They realized they couldn't afford it. I think the film still has a very adventurous look to it.
Well, when you get Simon Wincer and you want to go back to his home country of Australia to do some of the scenes, it saved them a lot of money.
Yeah, and I think it looks pretty solid, too. I think it does look like that kind of... during the time period, especially for kids, there were shows like Legends of the Hidden Temple, that competitive show where people would kind of go through the faux-looking temple. Yeah. I think this kind of matches up with that, a similar aesthetic, where, like, it's not real, but you're having fun watching those elements, you're having fun with the adventure side of it. I think the adventure stuff works pretty well, given the budget. It has to be something that's just understood. It's not a lot of budget.
Okay. And I think it's due for a remake, and I don't want a carbon copy of this. I think it's a cult classic and just mess with it. What you should, for a remake, make it a little more dark and foreboding, a little more villainous, a little more danger, like a little bit like, maybe like... the jungle is so inhabiting and so fearful, right? We're more worried about encountering the Phantom than a lion or something like that.
Yeah.
And then you have to find the right musical temperament to fit that. A right score that just almost like Indiana Jones does.
Yeah, because I
like
think
Star
David
Wars
Newman
does.
doesn't really give this film its own identity through the score. When I'm watching the film and I'm hearing the score, I'm knowing I'm watching the Phantom.
Something
But I
like,
don't think about the Phantom score. Like, I couldn't sing the Phantom score for you right now. But I'm watching the movie, it works, but it's not that walk out of the theater score. You know?
You need something like do, something like that to just announces he's there.
Yeah. I think in the realm of legacy sequels, if they can figure out the rights to it, I did have an idea that I thought would be really interesting in that Billy Zane's character could return in the legacy sequel and pass the mantle off to actually one of the, I think it's indigenous Ugandan children.
Right,
the idea...
Mask of Zorro was a legacy sequel without a legacy.
Yeah, exactly. I think you could do something like that with the Phantom character where you could give the character back to the Tugandans by actually having him, like, maybe he can't have children or something like that. So he passes the mantle off to one of the children that he's been with, you know?
We give away too much free... I mean, somebody's going to write this.
Yeah, somebody call us, and then somebody pay me.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think, James Remar stands up as well. Treat Williams. I think the villains are actually pretty good in the film. David Proval. I like David Proval, who's always in things like The Sopranos and Shawshank. He's a good little mafioso.
Yeah. I think it works well for what it is.
Mm-hmm.
Is a cult classic, below the radar kind of a film.
Yep.
If you wanted to sell it as a big production superhero, it's going to fall flat on its face. And people, I think, recognize the flaws of it, and that's what a cult classic is. It's a movie that got horrible reviews, that people appreciate it as what it is.
Yeah.
And we understand the flaws. It's a little clunky at times. It's supposed to be dark and foreboding at sometimes, and you get this hybrid that's kind of interesting and kind of clunky and janky, but it works.
Yeah. I always kind of find these films to be the ones where it's when you hear about like TV stations like the CW or like we're gonna do The Flash on a television budget and we're gonna do all these big major characters on a television budget, I always think a studio or a TV channel should try and aim at something like The Rocketeer or The Shadow or The Phantom, because when you watch this, you understand the limitations of budget. So doing it on TV could be done cheaper and still be fun and still be, worthwhile. I always find it interesting that you get people like, we're going to do a Supergirl show, and it's like, that's really freaking expensive. Do The Phantom. Yeah.
Or you can be on location in Hawaii,
Yeah.
So when you're off shooting, you can just chill out on the beach.
Yeah.
Right. Give us $1 million for your idea.
Yeah. Keep a lookout for the film. The Palmer Mansion in the film where Diana and her uncle reside is actually the Playboy Mansion. Hugh Hefner was a big fan of the Phantom, so he allowed them to film there for
I
the
hope
movie.
they send the fumigators before they started.
Or at least after. But yeah.
And after. We'll come in before and after.
Those are the weekly fumigators, hon. They're here all the time. Yeah, I think you're right, though. I think the film, if you recognize the flaws, because I see that same kind of thing when I look at films like Dick Tracy, when I look at films like Dark Man or The Rocketeer, is I still see flaws in all those films. The sense of adventure is there, and I think if you latch onto it and you get on that wavelength, you can have fun. But this isn't a film for everybody.
No, right. I think you want to do old-fashioned. I think if you want to go back, do old-fashioned. Do matte painting board, kind of like Dick Tracy.
Yeah.
And go back old-fashioned way.
Almost do what Coppola did for Dracula. See how much you can stretch practical.
Yeah.
And really embrace that, because I think there's going to be the sensation if they ever did another Phantom movie to go CGI heavy, and I don't think that serves the character, because the character is supposed to be a little hokey, I feel.
And a little bit of he's not infallible. He can get hurt and wounded. Some get shredded, tore up, cut.
Yeah, it's nice to see our heroes not show up perfect at the end of the day, because no one's perfect at the end of the day.
Right. And then if you disrobes, there's scar tissue everywhere all over his body, kind of like Batman does when he takes, because of fighting in the jungle all this time.
Yeah, but I think there was definitely the sense that the studio thought this would be big. They had planned a trilogy, and also look around, look online, search for it. The Phantom Got Milk advertisement. He did a Got Milk advertisement. So they obviously thought this was going to be a thing.
Oh, well, this had to be when I was in college, so late 90s.
So Billy Zane sitting on a throne with a white mustache.
Yeah.
Check it out.
That was big. Wasn't
that
that big in the late 90s when I was in college?
Late 90s and early 2000s. I have a poster in my childhood bedroom of the Hulk from Ang Lee's film with the milk mustache as well.
I got a great comment about what happened after we're done. So, Have you seen The Phantom? It's hard to do. Use ghostly
Yeah.
figure.
Are you sure you've ever seen The Phantom?
Yeah.
It's streaming right now on HBO Max, though, or Max. I'm going to call it HBO Max. It's streaming on HBO Max, so check out a copy of it there if you haven't had a chance to see it, and then come back and leave your thoughts on the film down below. And what would you do with a legacy sequel to this character? I think it's possible, but it would be kind of difficult to do because so many people don't even know this film
Make him
exists.
almost like a villain, like a monster of evil villain that
You
people
want
are
him to
just scared
transform.
of.
I think they should kind of play off of what they did with Robert Pattinson and the Batman, where there's kind of the sense that the Phantom is everywhere and nowhere, you know, but still have fun with it. Make it goofy. So let us know your thoughts on it down below in the comment section. Thank you guys for joining us. Make sure that you help and tell people about the show. We are so close to hitting our 400 subscribers, which we want to do by the end of the month.
We were really
Help
like
us
it.
out. Yeah. Give us that gift before the start of the school year. Thank you also for watching, and you can find all my film reviews over at goatfilmreviews.com.
And you can find my show at the St. Paul Filmcast, anywhere you find podcasts.